So, welcome to this session on Sociology and Science. It's page 187 to 195, and it's from the theory section of the course. Just a quick reminder that this is examined on paper 1 and paper 3, with a 10 marker on paper 1 and a 10 and a 20 on paper 3. So, positivism. We're going to start off by looking at the perspective that argues that sociology is a science. It is a science in the same way as physics, chemistry, and biology. Think about this question. What is the boiling point of water? Now, immediately, you will know the boiling point of water, 100 degrees C. That's because that is a fact. It is an objective fact that can be demonstrated by testing the boiling point of water again and again and again. And in fact, what we can do is we can control the variables that are involved in such a test. So we can use the same Bunsen burner, we can use the same test tube with the same volume of water, and we can repeat that again and again. And hopefully what we can then do is we can establish a proven scientific fact. So, can we do this with sociology? Well, Durkheim and the early positivists in the 19th century argued yes. If you look along the top diagram here, we've got our scientist, who I think we've actually got Galileo here, who's a little bit earlier on. We'll think of a theory. Our scientist will then observe the natural world through a microscope, for example, or going out and looking at the natural world itself. Then the scientist will come up with a way of testing it. And so we can see that demonstrated here in a laboratory with chemicals in test tubes and flasks. And from those tests, we will then be able to come up with theories that actually change the world around us. So it's the invention of electricity, it's space travel, it's architecture, it's everything that makes our world the modern world. And sociologists in the 19th century saw this. And they saw the massive success that science was having during this period known as the Enlightenment. And what they decided was that they wanted in on that action. And so for Durkheim, who is one of the founding fathers of sociology alongside Comte, he argued that we could observe society, we could then test society using quantifiable, measurable, observable phenomena, and we could then finally create a utopia, because we'd be able to discover the same underlying laws in human behaviour that we could in science. In science, you discover a set law, i.e., water boils at 100 degrees C in certain conditions. And so in sociology, you should be able to discover set laws as well. Humans will behave like this in these conditions. Once we know that, we can start to pass laws ourselves in society to make the perfect world. So this was the exciting project that the 19th century positivists went into. Now, you've already met the positivists in research methods, and what they argued so far is that you need quantitative data, that is data expressed in numbers. They argue that this is less biased, so it doesn't involve the researcher, and ends up being more reliable and representative. You've found out that positivists prefer an objective approach. They believe that the only way of finding the truth is to be balanced only by the facts, to only consider the facts, to not use your own personal opinions, because your own personal opinions are, quite literally, unreliable. They change from day to day, from moment to moment. Therefore, you are trying to remove bias in your research. Positivists like macro, large-scale studies. That's why you've looked at official statistics as one of their main research methods. They argue that what is true in one situation must therefore be true in all other situations, because they've discovered this social law. And as you've discovered, one of the criticisms of positivist methodology is limited validity. They don't give you a deep, rich, and detailed understanding for how society works. And often the methods are high in reliability, that is, that they can be repeated again and again and get the same or similar results, and that they are high in representativeness, because they often include large samples. So for this topic then, what we need to look at and think about is positivism itself, and what is it actually arguing? Well, it's arguing that we should study sociology in the same way as the natural sciences. For Durkheim, society is made up of social facts. Now, he uses that word fact here in the same way that scientists use it. A fact is something which is observable and measurable. And for Durkheim, in society, social facts operate in exactly the same way as things like the boiling point of water. Once you know this, we can develop laws about how society works, and finally, we can introduce those policies. So let's give an example of this. I'm going to track Durkheim's study of suicide along with these 4 points. So Durkheim wanted to show that even a deeply personal act like suicide had a scientific explanation. He wanted to show that there is a law underpinning human behaviour when it comes to committing suicide. Now, there's nothing more personal than an individual's decision to commit suicide, nothing more emotionally charged. And so if Durkheim can explain this scientifically, then he really has won a massive victory for the positivists. He decided to look at suicide statistics provided by the French government. He was French, Durkheim, living in France at the time, and so he looked at quantitative data. What he found was that Protestants committed suicide more often than Catholics. Now, Protestantism and Catholicism are two denominations of Christianity. Nearly everybody in France was a Christian at that time. You had Protestant Christians and Catholic Christians. Protestant Christians were committing suicide far more often. What Durkheim argued, what he hypothesized, was that this was down to a new social law that he had discovered. This social law is that humans, when they integrate, when they live in a community, when they live close to their family and close to their friends, are happier. And as a result, the suicide rate is lower amongst Catholics because Catholics lived with their families and their friends in a closer, more integrated community. Protestants tended to live on their own or in small nuclear families, isolated from the rest of society, a little bit like the way we live today in blocks of flats. Whereas the Catholics tended to live in sprawling communities surrounded by grandparents, children, uncles, aunts, and all of this meant that their levels of happiness were increased, and so their level of suicide decreased. So what Durkheim then argued is that when we are passing laws in our country, in our politics, we should focus on increasing integration of communities, because if we do this, we will make people happier. Durkheim believes he's discovered a law in the same way that Einstein discovered relativity, and the new social law that he can pronounce is that integration reduces unhappiness. Okay, interpretivists completely disagree. Interpretivists are going to argue that sociology is not a science. Think of this situation. Why is this man breaking into someone's house? Immediately popping up into your head, there are probably a bunch of reasons. Maybe he's struggling for money, maybe he's addicted to drugs, maybe he's locked out of his own house, although why he'd wear a balaclava to break back in would be rather questionable. A number of different possible reasons. Maybe he had a difficult childhood. Maybe he lost his job recently. We just don't know. And this is the interpretivist's point. Interpretivists would say the only way of answering this question is to speak to this man, because he is a thinking, feeling, conscious being capable of free will. And because he has this free will, the only way of understanding him is to talk to him, one-to-one, as a human being, not study him like a test tube filled with water. So, interpretivism in research methods, as you've met already, qualitative data expressed in words, rich in detail and validity, building rapport with participants is really important. In-depth studies of small groups, that's why participant observation, particularly unstructured interviews and documents, are favoured by the interpretivists. They argue that this scientific line of reasoning, i.e. observing the world, testing the world, and then coming up with a new theory, That only works when what you are studying can be observed and measured. You can observe the boiling point of water, and you can measure the boiling point of water again and again. But as we just found out with our man breaking into the house, we are studying something different in sociology. We are studying consciousness, internal meanings that we give to the world around us. We are studying something that cannot be observed and measured. We can only get it secondhand by talking to people, by speaking to people, by engaging with them. So therefore, we don't want sociology to be a science, argue the interpretivists. It cannot be a science. What it has to be instead is an interrogation of people's meanings, the internal, individual meanings that they place on their actions. So let's track this through. Sociology is the study of social meanings. That phrase will keep coming up, social meanings, because each of you listening to this right now is having your own individual conscious response to this. You are attaching your own meanings to situations. Even for things that we all do, like loving our loved ones. We all have our own individual way that we do this, our individual meanings that we attach to the love of our loved ones. And so in sociology, we have the exact same problem. We are studying individuals who are free and conscious, and they create their own meanings. So the object of sociology, what we are actually studying, is not social facts, as Durkheim said, but ideas. And ideas cannot be measured. So, ideas can be studied, though. All hope is not lost, because we can talk to people. We can listen to people. Weber called this, and he's the father of modern interpretivism, Weber called this the process of Verstehen. Verstehen in German just means to understand. And you're just going through the process of understanding somebody else. It's never going to be perfect, but through talking to them and listening to them, i.e. unstructured interviews, participant observation, you're going to start to understand their meanings. Now, Jack Douglas in the 1960s came up with a very famous attack on Emil Durkheim, and he argued that Durkheim's theory is completely flawed because he relies on statistics that are themselves inventions. They have been made up. Let's have a look why. So Douglas argues Durkheim is wrong to use OS when studying suicide, and he argues that each stage of processing a suicide, the state relied on people's meanings. So what we mean here is that terrible situation has happened, somebody has been found dead. Let's say that they've been washed up in the Thames. We find the body. Who finds the body? The police. So what do the police do? Well, the police, they call it in as a potential suicide. Why do they do that? Well, because they have been socialized to think of people who've jumped into the Thames as committing suicide. Then the body gets delivered to the coroner, who's the person that looks at the dead body and decides the cause of death. The coroner then decides, based on his or her socialization, what the cause of death was, and decides on suicide. The family members all use their labels to attach meaning to the death of this individual. Well, he was very depressed for a while. He did seem upset. He did seem angry at losing that job. So it was probably a suicide. All of these people are making educated guesses based on their socialization. So the final statistic that Durkheim is using is not a fact at all. Not like the boiling point of water anyway. It is in fact a social construction. It is an invented social fact. It has been created by all of these people's meanings. The police officer's meanings, which could have gone one way or the other. Police officer says, oh, I don't think this was a suicide. I think it was a murder. Right, let's follow that path. The coroner's meanings. He says, oh, I don't think this was a suicide. I think it was something else. Follows a completely different path and doesn't go into the final statistic. So Durkheim really wasn't studying the rate of suicide. He was studying the rate at which people label things a suicide. And so his scientific endeavour was flawed from the beginning. Popper. Okay, so now a slightly different tack here. Popper is going to argue that sociology is only a science if it can be tested. Now, I wish this was my garden, but this is a Google Images garden. At the bottom of this garden is a fairy. Now, you can't see it, you can't touch it, you can't taste it, you can't smell it. In fact, there's no way for you to engage with this fairy at all, but I can see it, I can engage with it. Now, your next question is probably, well, prove that there's a fairy then. And I'd say, well, I can see it. And you'd say, well, that's not proof. Because in order for there to be a fairy at the bottom of your garden and for it to be scientifically true, we'd have to be able to prove you wrong. You can't prove me wrong because I've just told you that you can't see it, touch it, taste it, hear it, sense it in any way, shape, or form. So, what Popper is going to argue then is that statements like there's a fairy at the bottom of my garden and you can't see it, touch it, taste it, sense it, are meaningless and non-scientific. Sociology makes these kinds of statements, argues Popper. Popper says that sociology must be falsifiable to be a science. That is, it can be proven false. Science, argues Popper, works through a process of falsifying previous theories, and this is called falsificationism. If you falsify a theory, it means that you prove it to be wrong. What Popper says is that all scientific statements can be proven wrong, and that is what makes them scientific statements. So for a statement to be scientific, it has to be proven false. Let's take the boiling point of water. If I say the boiling point of water is 102 degrees C, that is a scientific statement because we can prove that wrong. And if somebody comes along with a better thermometer than me, they can prove my statement wrong and they can say it's 100 degrees C. But here's the thing. Saying that water boils at 100 degrees C can also be proven wrong. It just feels unlikely at the moment, but some big theories have come along and proven some things wrong that we thought were absolutely established fact. All knowledge is temporary. That means it will not last forever, or it could change, because it can be proven false at any time by a better theory. If somebody came out now with a scientific paper proving that the boiling point of water was 101 degrees C, and they could prove it, then they would win the Nobel Prize. And that's because knowledge in science is temporary. Sociology, according to Popper, is often unscientific because it can't be proven false. Now let's look at a good example here. Marxists say that there will be a revolution, as you already know. If there is a revolution, then they're right. If there isn't a revolution, it'll come soon, and so they're still right. And so you can't actually prove the Marxists wrong. We cannot prove their theory false. So according to Popper, that is not a scientific theory because it cannot be proven false. What Popper says the aim for sociology should be is to try and use theories which are testable and falsifiable. And the way to do this would be to use normally positivist methods, your classic scientific style methods. So to summarise then, Popper says that sociology nearly always is unscientific because it uses theories like Marxism which cannot be proven false. Okay, let's have a think about Kuhn then, and he's our final one that we're going to do here. So sociology is not a science because it doesn't have a paradigm. Now, because is an important keyword. It's actually because with the S removed. Here we have a scientist. Let's call her Mina. So Mina the scientist is currently existing within a paradigm. Now the paradigm is the two blue lines, almost like tram lines or train lines, that are holding Mina inside, in place. A paradigm is a shared set of beliefs and assumptions. So the paradigm in education at the moment is that you should read textbooks, you should listen to your teacher, you should write essays in order to be successful. That's the paradigm. Those are the accepted theories, the accepted beliefs. Now, Mina has been socialized into the accepted scientific beliefs. She, as you can see here, is using a pipette. She is using test tubes. She is using the machinery that has been given to her in the laboratory. She believes in evolution. She believes in the Big Bang. She believes in the theory of relativity as put forward by Einstein. She follows all the mainstream accepted theories. If Mina stepped outside of those tramlines, she would be called an idiot. She would be declared unpublishable. That means that no scientific journal would publish her research. She would be accused of heresy. You're going against the traditional beliefs of the time. And people ultimately would say, sorry, Mina, you're no longer a scientist. What Kuhn is pointing out here is that science is actually quite similar to religion in some ways. It has accepted theories that if you go out of them, everybody will attack you and you won't be accepted. So this, according to Kuhn, is what science is like. So we have to say, when we're asking, is sociology a science, is this the way that sociology also works? Right, let's track this through. So Kuhn says sociology must have a paradigm to be a science. Kuhn disagrees with Popper, so he's attacking Popper here. I should just clarify that. Popper is saying, remember, that Mina's main job is to prove theories false, not to go along with the tide of accepted theories. Kuhn says that's a load of rubbish. Mina's theory here, Mina's main focus in life here is to just do what she's told by the scientific establishment. So Kuhn and Popper completely disagree with each other. Kuhn disagrees with Popper by suggesting that science is just like other belief systems in that it has an agreed paradigm of acceptable behaviours and beliefs, an agreed set of assumptions. You will follow the theory of the Big Bang. You will use test tubes and microscopes. You will do what everybody else is saying. Science has basic assumptions, methods and techniques that all members are socialised into. If you go to do science at university, you will be socialised into how to do science. They will not say to you, go and prove everybody wrong, as Popper seems to think. If you obey the rules, you're successful. And as we just found out with Mina, if you don't follow the scientific rules, you will be called an idiot. Let's connect this back to sociology then. Is this the way sociology works? Well, sociology doesn't have a paradigm. Sociology has competing perspectives. Marxism, functionalism, feminism, they disagree with each other on just about everything. And so there is no one shared set paradigm. And so Kuhn says science has a paradigm. So if sociology cannot have a paradigm, sociology cannot be a science. So sociology would need to develop a central agreed paradigm in order to qualify as a science. This is super unlikely. As we just found, Marxists and functionalists disagree with each other on just about everything. Just an extra little analysis point here. I'm going to talk through the analysis points in a second, but postmodernists would argue that a paradigm would be really undesirable because if you, as you will learn, if you haven't learned already, postmodernists argue that meta-narratives are breaking down. That is, big stories that we tell ourselves, like science, like Marxism, like functionalism. These big stories are dying. And so to introduce a paradigm of sociology is not only impossible, it's also undesirable because meta-narratives are ultimately untrue. They're ultimately false. How do you do analysis for this topic? Well, I've tracked it out for you here. So with positivists, you can attack with interpretivism, you can support with Popper, and Kuhn will give an alternate perspective that would count for your analysis. Interpretivism, you can attack with positivism, obviously, attack with Popper, Kuhn will provide alternative. Popper, you can attack with interpretivism, defend with positivism or support with positivism, and you can attack with Kuhn, obviously. And Kuhn, you can give an alternative with interpretivism, attack with Popper, and positivism will give you an alternative as well. Okay, example exam questions are just up there for you. They're pretty straightforward here, really. Outline and explain two arguments which suggest sociology is not a science. So if you're arguing that sociology is not a science, then you can go Popper, Kuhn, or interpretivism. Outline and explain two reasons some sociologists argue sociology is a science. That's the slightly trickier one. what you could do is you could do positivism as one, and then you could do Popper as the second, if it is testable. And the final one, evaluate the claim that sociology can never be considered a science. You can use all of the four below. Obviously, you only need 3 Peel paragraphs for a 20 marker. Okay, that is it.